Originalism is a way of reading the law, and I think in particular of reading constitutions, whether state or federal, that takes the meaning of the words as fixed at the time that we enacted those words, and then expects judges and lawyers and anyone reading it to take that meaning as a constraint on what they can do in applying those words. And we'll get into lots of examples, but basically it's rooted in the common sense that we mean what we say. In this case, we the people, when we ratified the Constitution and when we've ratified amendments to our state and federal constitutions, we meant what we said when we adopted that text, those words, as our supreme law.
So it seems to me like if you're going to have a rule from the consent of the governed, this seems like a pretty foundational principle.
Yeah, I think that's right. Generally, when any of us speak, in particular when we make law, we have a meaning behind it. And while there are details about how exactly we find that meaning, nearly all judges, nearly all readers of constitutions are originalists to some extent. So, for example, if we look at the qualifications for the President of the United States, we all recognize that when the Constitution says that any person eligible to that office must attain the age of 35 years, right? We know what they meant.
Well, what if they meant intellectual age? I've met some really smart kiddos out there.
Right. We would be worried if a judge read that as a standard of maturity, or if we tried to update or evolve that text to say, well, actually 35 at the time, given life expectancy, it's more like 50 now.
Well, 25 is the new 35. Everyone knows that.
Right.
Yeah, no, so I totally get you. But this standard, this change, or the ability to look at the Constitution and get new meanings from it must come from another school.
Well, everyone is, as Justice Kagan said at her confirmation, we are all originalists now. But one of the things that she noted was sometimes the framers laid down very specific rules, like the 35-year-old requirement for president. Sometimes they laid down broad principles. Now, either way, we apply what they say, what they meant to do. So in that sense, we're all originalists. But not every question of the Constitution is as easy as how old the president has to be. For example, the president has to be a natural-born citizen. How are we supposed to figure that out? Well, reading it today, we might think, well, if the president was born by C-section, right, they wouldn't be a natural-born citizen. Well, most people would agree that you have to be an originalist in reading that text. In other words, to understand what did they mean by natural-born citizen, and they just meant that someone who was a citizen under the laws that they were at the time. It gets trickier in most of the controversial issues where the words we're trying to interpret are things like deprived of liberty without due process of law, or the equal protection of the laws, or even the executive power.
So I'm curious, though, despite Kagan's claim that we're all originalists now, there are alternative original, even in the school of originalism, there's different versions of it, right? And then outside of, just vaguely speaking, there's this idea of a more flexible interpretation, or what we might call the living document approach to the Constitution. And it seems to me, even when it comes to the originalists, the originalist interpretation as a maxim kind of yields itself to personal interpretation when it comes to certain issues. In the idea that I'm an originalist up to the point on this particular issue, which is near and dear to me, for example. Maybe we could flesh out some of the other options for people?
So, I think you got it right, and I think in a sense the claim, to me, the way I see it, and I'm happy to be controversial here, the way I see it is that when we claim we are all originalists, we are making a weak claim, which is that the words in the Constitution matter. Sure, but everybody agrees with that. Nobody's going to say, sure, I don't care about the Constitution. And to me, it seems like many times when we discuss originalism, what we hear is something like a trivial or false view. Either it's trivial, that is that we care about the words in the Constitution, and that's a trivial claim. There is nothing that hangs to this. Or it's to my view at least, largely false, which is that the proper way to interpret the Constitution when it comes to hard cases or when it comes to difficult situations, when we don't know exactly what it means, when we don't know how to apply, is to look at what those people meant at the time. That is either the intent, as you said, there are different kinds of originalism, either the intent of the people who voted on it, and in all fairness, mind reading now is hard, but mind reading in the past is going to be very hard. And then how do you collect different intents? And it's really hard. Or the words in the dictionary, what they meant at the time. And all of this, so you make a choice about how to interpret. And the question is whether that in particular interpretation is the proper interpretation for the Constitution. What's behind is the idea is that the authority of the Constitution comes from the fact that it was voted by certain people, voted at a certain time. But that can be disputed. You can say that the authority of the Constitution comes from the moral principles that are defended by it. And so you can look at those moral principles to interpret the Constitution instead of looking at those words.
Well, and the other thing, too, is just a human foible, right? Sometimes the laws we pass don't have their intended consequences, right?
Right.
Most notably right now, everyone's chatting about the Affordable Care Act, which if you went back 8 years ago, we were supposed to see declining in prices on our insurance, which at least in Montana and places like Arizona just frankly didn't happen. The intent was there, but the actual law didn't do that for us. So when we look at things that people intend when they write laws and what actually comes out, do you judge what the law says or what it was meant to say? And sometimes that's a tricky question, right?
It is a tricky question. And the other thing I wanted to say is that besides the trivial or false, there's also this false dilemma, this idea that if you're not originalist, then it's anything goes. But that's false. There are, as you said, there are other schools. There are at least 3 other schools that you can think of. So the one I just sketched, which is the idea that there are some moral principles that are within the law and not external to the law, but within the law that you can try to identify, interpret the law according to those moral principles. There are also some ideas about what brings the best for the society in terms of consequences. And also there's the common law tradition, which probably, Anthony, would be better to, in terms of expertise on this one than when I don't know much about it. But the 2 others
well the
really
common law, of course, does play a big role, even in the formation of the United States Constitution. You have to apply some common law principles even to interpreting the rules and the language, the art of the language used to write the Constitution. So, I mean, obviously every judge is going to bring some different insights to bear, although I think some of these different types of interpretation yield themselves more towards taking away the ability of us to govern ourselves as a free people than other types. And maybe we'll get into that after this break. We'll take that right now. We'll be back in just a second. If you have a question or a comment or you want to fight or get feisty, call 721-1290. We like passion about the Constitution. I mean, we've got 2 lawyers in the room. They've devoted their lives to this, right? Well, she's a pre-lawyer. I don't know what that means. She's burgeoning. She's blossoming. She's coming into her lawyer maturity here shortly. We'll talk to you in just a second.
Timbers is the all-new restaurant inside the exciting new Grey Wolf Peak Casino at the top of Evero Hill. What a menu for lunch and dinner and now breakfast, too. Chef Rick, you've branched out. You're now serving breakfast at Timbers Restaurant as well.
You're right, Denny. We are, and we have a couple items here that we're pretty proud of. We have a Southwest Benedict with Canadian bacon, poached eggs, orange chipotle hollandaise, sauteed mushrooms, sliced avocado, and then we have our, even for a basic meal, our oatmeal brulee, old-fashioned still-cut oats, caramelized berries, vanilla, and cinnamon. Invite everybody to come in. Our hours of operation are 7 to 10:30 daily.
Yeah, that's right. You serve lunch and dinner from 11 all the way till 10 p.m. every night, right?
That's correct.
And so, wow, convenient hours on the breakfast, too, from 7 to 10:30. Now, St. Patrick's Day is coming up. What does Timbers have planned, Rick?
Well, we are going to offer a buffalo Irish stew, Irish nacho, and hand-battered fish and chips.
Hey, great stuff to look forward to on St. Patrick's Day. Now let's meet the marketing manager for Grey Wolf Peak Casino. Addie has joined us. And Addie, what are some of the benefits of the Players Club at Grey Wolf Peak?
Actually, all new members do get anything from $10 to a $30 extra credit bonus.
And anything new we need to know about?
We actually have a brand new program at Grey Wolf. It's called the Bounce Back Program. So the more you come in to play and visit us, the more you receive. It's a weekly to a daily offer for all of our players.
And like Chef Rick in Timber's restaurant, you got something going for St. Patrick's Day too, right?
We do. We actually have some hot seats that start from 6 to 9 every half hour. You could win anything from $50 to $350.
Bring your restaurant and gaming experience to a new peak. Timber's Restaurant and Grey Wolf Peak Casino. Just 10 minutes north of the Y, Highway 93, top of Evero Hill.
If you need to know more, you can always give us a call at 726-3778.
All right, we're back on the Talk Back Show and chatting with Soazig Bihan from the University of Montana. Not a lawyer, a philosopher. I've been corrected. And Anthony Johnstone from the University of Montana, formerly a lawyer and attorney representing the state of Montana, and now a professor at the University of Montana. Is that right, John? Anthony?
That's right.
So let's get into I guess there's a gradation here of different types of interpretation. And I feel that some of them yield themselves to more likely take away the consent of the governed from the voting populace. And basically, I think this is the basic understanding of the way at least I look at an interpretation of the Constitution. If the people get together, they have elected officials, those elected officials pass a law, and then 20 years down the road, the law that they passed is reinterpreted in a totally different way from what the people understood it, then at that point, the people really don't have representation. They don't get to elect their judges directly. They don't have the whole system of our American governance wasn't designed for that kind of an outcome. And I feel like that has happened from time to time in American jurisprudence in such a way that it has led to some dangerous outcomes. I think when you look at some historical examples of where originalism was seen to be important by some of our presidents, for example, after the Civil War, we could have simply just applied all of the rules we had applied to white folk from the founders, life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, to all African Americans. Just reinterpreted the Constitution. But instead of doing it the simple way, Abraham Lincoln and others, of course, thought it was important enough for us to actually go in and change an amendment to the Constitution. And I think that's a good example of why it's important for the United States to go through the process of the people being involved in the laws and the change of those laws. Thoughts?
Well, here's a more recent example. I guess I'd say that we might think of three alternatives to originalism as Soazig laid out. You might put the text first, in the text and the historical meaning of it, and that's the originalist position. Another one would be to look at precedent or the practices of both judges and the American people over time and try to get a read on the people, we the people, that way. And that, I think the defenders of that view also think that they are trying to represent the people's view, but just through a different, more common law method. And we have examples of that.
So can we talk about that one for a second? Because that can be confusing, right? So in the case you're just mentioning, we're making an assumption here that the meaning and the interpretation have been different for maybe a long period of time. And I don't doubt that that's the case. We have many laws, perhaps, in American law where the original meaning, and sometimes we find out original meanings and their intents later because they're historical documents that were missing. We didn't have all the evidence. We later found it, that sort of thing. And the U.S. Supreme Court has interpreted it a certain way for so long, or lower courts have interpreted it a way for so long that going back to maybe the original meaning would be quite a bit of a switch.
I think that's right. Here's a great example. Madison, James Madison, often viewed as the father of the Constitution, took much better notes than the official secretary of the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia, but he refused to publish them because he didn't want, at the time, the framers, the drafters' intent to control the people's interpretation of the document. And so in one very famous example, James Madison opposed the creation of a national bank of the United States. 20 years later, when he was president and saw that the people had in fact, ratify that meaning. He thought that that wasn't the meaning of the Constitution. The Constitution didn't permit the creation of a national bank. But after a few years, and by the time he was president, and by the way, had some war debts to pay off from the War of 1812, he said, you know what, I'm going to sign the bill. I'm okay with a national bank. The people, as he said, have liquidated the meaning of the Constitution. And so, in some ways, we're all trying to get at the meaning of the Constitution. It's just whether the primary source should be judges and history and text, or perhaps look more broadly to the people themselves.
Well, and I think it was Scalia that uses an example about the phrase, a man uses a cane, and then use that to kind of explain, the actual words use a cane doesn't necessarily mean that you use a cane to walk with, right? I might use a cane to poke my sister to go get me a cup of water. The text, if you read it strictly, doesn't indicate necessarily that one's walking with a cane. But the common meaning of he uses a cane is that that person uses a cane to walk with as a form of mobility. And so the idea, the distinction between text and meaning, I think in this example, Mr. Scalia was using it as to show some of the difficulty between different schools of originalist thought. There's originalist meaning, there's an originalist textual, and there's originalist general public meaning, right?
Right.
So,
right. And with respect to precedent, Justice Scalia himself said he was a faint-hearted originalist. He was not going to use an original meaning, for example, to overturn long-established legal principles, even if he thought they were untrue to the original meaning, because one of the values of originalism is certainty and constraint on judges, and precedent can provide that sometimes better than original meaning, and he recognized that.
Did he say faint-hearted originalist? I thought he said like faint-hearted structural something else. I mean, he makes really. This is Scalia, by the way. I mean, each different word is very.
Followed be his name.
Okay, yeah. I mean, he when he talks about originalism, he's talking about a particular form of originalism. Well, hey, let's go to the phone. It's Steve. Steve, thanks so much for calling in. You're on the air.
Yeah, just a question. Personally, I like what the Constitution was meant to stand for. I like the inalienable right idea of life, liberty, and property. But I wonder, and just to the point you guys were making, is it even possible to be originalist anymore? Because it has changed so much. Just a couple things, I guess, is when originally the states supplied the federal government, the national government, I should say, with their revenue. And then that changed through an amendment to where the national government could actually do an income tax. So that shifted power. When the amendment that changed the way the senators were chosen from the states choosing them to a popular vote also really switched the balance of power between the national and the state. And then this idea that the lower courts can actually check the president. I guess the way I would see it is you've got your three branches of power, and it would be the Supreme Court with the ability to check the president, not lower federal courts at a state level. Is it even possible to really get at the meaning that the Constitution was originally meant to have?
Anthony, let's hear from you.
Well, on that last point, lower courts are invested by the Constitution with the same judicial power the Supreme Court has. The Supreme Court can correct them. But lower federal courts stand in the same position with respect to the other branches in interpreting the Constitution as the supreme law of the land as other courts. But I think Steve raises a very important point about interpretation over time. The income tax, the direct election of senators, something Montana had a very good reason to do after the history of Senator Clark, all of these changes were made through amendments to the Constitution. One of the tricks then, Justice John's example of the Reconstruction amendments after the Civil War, is how do those new amendments and new meanings in that text change how we might read the text that was adopted earlier? The fact that we have an income tax and that the government is able to raise much more revenue than it might have been prior to that, the fact that we have direct elections of senators and that state legislators are no longer checks on the federal government through the Senate, might change the way we read other parts of the Constitution.
Hey, thanks for your call. We got to go to another break. When we get back, John, we'll put you on, and we'll get to more questions and answers. By the way, I looked up my debate with you. It wasn't really a debate. I was just unclear. But I've read things from Scalia on the faint-hearted thing. And Volokh conspiracy, which is where a lot of lawyers go to chat about stuff. They have some quotes from him. And this is in an interview with New York Magazine where Scalia was kind of pushed on the faint-hearted thing by Randy Barnett. He said, "You've described yourself as a faint-hearted originalist, but really, how faint-hearted are you?" And then he said, "I described myself as that a long time ago, but I've repudiated that." So you're a stout-hearted originalist? I try to be an honest originalist. I will take the bitter with the sweet. What I used as faint-hearted in reference to was, and then he said, they go on to the issue of flogging and get into some more legal mumbo-jumbo. But I guess you could say when we're looking at a lawyer, as when we're looking at any other person, right, maybe interpretations and schools of interpretation change over time. Let's go to a quick break, and we'll be back in just a second.
Town for 5 days or more, protect your vehicle at Vigilante Parking on the Fly. No shuttle. You pick your car up at the airport, and we pick it up. Big parking lots can be the place where your car gets treated like an old bologna sandwich. Pamper your car at Vigilante Parking on the Fly. We can also take your car in for service work. When your flight arrives home, we have your vehicle waiting for you at the airport. No shuttle, no waiting, just ready. If you're flying out of town for 5 days or more, stay safe at Vigilante Parking on the Fly. Make your reservation Monday through Friday at 549-4111.
2 kids, 1 paycheck. But I'm still going to send them to college. With Sam, I can.
Business has fallen off at work, but I'm getting prepared for whatever the future holds. With Sam, I can.
I missed a mortgage payment, but now I'm turning things around. With Sam, I can.
Making ends meet on a tight budget, coping with job loss, struggling with overwhelming credit card bills. Whatever your financial challenge, with Sam, you can. Sam is Smart About Money, a free online resource from the National Endowment for Financial Education. We're an independent nonprofit foundation dedicated to helping people just like you get sound information about money. From everything from how to build an emergency fund to how to deal with job uncertainty, just remember, Sam I Can. SamICan.org.
I'm going to feel in control again. With Sam, I can.
Get empowered. Reach your financial goals. Visit SamICan.org.
You want to feel connected, at one with your world. Informed, included, and inspired. So no matter where you are, when important things happen, we're here at all hours, in the moment, on every screen in your life. Your local TV and radio broadcasters. We investigate and inform, give back to the community, build the local economy, even save lives. America's #1 source for news, weather, and information. And unlike any other news source, we're here. 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 And here. We are broadcasters, always here for you, wherever here may be. Text TV to 52886. Tell Washington local stations matter.
The American Red Cross urgently needs blood and platelet donations and asks donors to schedule an appointment to give now. Every 2 seconds, someone in the United States needs blood. Your blood donation is critical and can help save lives. Please, schedule an appointment today. Download the Blood Donor app, visit redcrossblood.org, or call 1-800-RED-CROSS today. You can make a difference.
All right, I'm going to go as fast as I can. We're going to get John on the air to ask his question. Hey, John, we only have a few seconds left, so please make it quick.
Okay, I've appreciated your guest comments in the past, but I have a question. Are they both citizens of the United States? I think it's important to be so if you're commenting on the constitutional meanings.
Yeah, sure. Are you folks both citizens of the United States?
Yes, I think I'm even a natural-born citizen.
Are you a natural-born Montanan, more importantly?
No, I was raised in Minnesota by Montanans.
I don't trust a word he says. Oh, how about you, Soazig?
I am on the process of being a citizen. I am not at this point. But I have a question for John. Why do you think it's important?
We will get to that maybe later.
Okay.
Thank you.
Great question. Thanks for your call. We have to go to a break, though. We'll be back in just a second.
This is Talkback with Peter Christian and John King. 721-1290 or 1-800-568-5309.
This is Newstalk KGVO, AM 1290 and 98.3 FM. KGVO, Missoula's news and weather station.
And Talkback is brought to you this morning by Bull's Eyewear, by Western State Cat, and by Selway Armory.
The views and opinions expressed on Talkback are not those of the staff, management, or advertisers.
Well, as we are wont to do every Friday, we have County Attorney Kirsten Pabst on the phone. Thanks so much for calling in, Kirsten. Foolish John actually has to hit the button before Kirsten can talk. Hey, Kirsten, are you there still?
I am here. Good morning.
Thank you for enjoying and involving yourself in our discussion today, despite my button-pressing skills lacking this morning.
You can't have it all.
I know. Hey, thanks for bringing it all, at least to the table, and telling us what's going on locally.
I'm happy to do that, John. We've had a busy week. 16 new cases filed and appeared this week in court. I'll give you a quick rundown. There were 2 child criminal endangerment cases involving pretty severe exposure to drugs. There was an arson case filed that involved 5 counts of arson and or attempted arson involving allegedly lighting cars on fire.
How many counts was that?
5.
Does that mean there were 5 different vehicles or 5 different people trying to light the same car on fire?
1 person, 5 counts.
Wow.
Yeah, busy.
Where was this at?
This was in Missoula. Have it here. Well,
yeah, that's okay. We don't need to get into this, but it was in the city, huh?
It was in the city, yes. It's a city case.
Oh, man.
We had 2 new felony DUIs, theft case, and here's the concerning one again, 4 new partner family member assaults, 2 of which were felonies and 2 which involved strangulation. Interestingly, this same week we sent 2 men to prison for being convicted of abusing their partners, which also involves strangulation and pretty significant abuse. So we're seeing another surge in that area, sadly. 5 new drug cases as well, and a fugitive.
A fugitive, wow. So these strangulation cases, man, they just seem to keep hitting every other week, it seems. We have at least 1 or 2.
They really do, and there's some, the obvious reason that we're so concerned about them is that, 1, it indicates pretty significant future risk, and it also presents pretty significant present risk for those who are victims of strangulation, because it can cause all kinds of physical changes. It can cause issues with the brain, with the heart. So if somebody is a victim of strangulation and it doesn't seem serious, I would really recommend that they seek medical attention, because there are complications that can occur when somebody loses the ability to breathe for a bit.
Now, Kirsten, I know that there's a bill, isn't there, at the legislature that might change state law when it comes to these strangulation cases?
Well, I can tell you there's a bill that makes it its own crime, though. I don't know how much it actually changes, from my perspective, what we do, because we prosecute them vehemently anyway, just under the aggravated assault statute.
I gotcha. So basically you push the aggravated assault statute to a place where it would basically be no change for our local criminal justice system.
It gives us another tool in our toolbox, and so that's always a good thing. All of these cases, there's a continuum, and there's a continuum of charges as well, and so sometimes we can charge attempted deliberate homicide, sometimes egg assault, sometimes partner family member assault, depending on the severity of the facts.
Wow. Hey, when it comes to the arson case that we mentioned earlier, I assume arson is a felony?
Some arson is a felony and some is a misdemeanor. There's negligent arson, and also depending on the value of the property that's destroyed or attempted to be destroyed. This case is very definitely a felony.
So if they tried to light my car on fire, probably not a felony, in other words. You're giving me the hard news here, aren't you?
I'm not sure what you drive, John.
No, neither am I. It's pretty much a piece of trash at this point, especially after driving through potholes so far this spring.
Well, you don't have to answer this, but if it meets the $1,500 value, and we usually go by Kelley Blue Book, we could be in the felony range.
Okay, gotcha. So $1,500 or more. So just like regular theft cases. It can become felonies if they're over $1,500.
Absolutely.
So who sits around and makes up these $1,500? I mean, where does that become the line?
Between a felony and a misdemeanor?
Yeah, I mean, like, just who decided that?
Well, for years it was $100, and then with inflation it was $500 when I started prosecuting, and we're up to $1,500 to divide it between felony and misdemeanor, and I would assume that within the next few years it's going to be moved up again to either $2,500 or $5,000, just to essentially reduce the clog in the district court.
Do you think the $1,500 is a little low then at this point?
At this point, I do think it's a little low. We've been at that level for a number of years now, but
sure. Do I hear 2,000? Do I hear 2,500? 2,500? There you go. 3,000, 3,500.
We will leave that to the legislature in its ultimate wisdom.
Ultimate wisdom. Well, that's one way to describe the legislature. Hey, well, thanks so much for joining us today, Kirsten.
You're welcome. Have a great weekend.
You too. We'll talk to you later. Bye-bye. All right, we're going to go back to talking about the Constitution and originalism and other schools of thought with interpretation right after this quick break.
RV is ready for another season of fun. Experience huge savings during the preseason power sale and cash in on their lowest prices of the year. They've got power pricing on new 2017 RVs, boats, personal watercraft, and season-end clearance prices on new Ski-Doo snowmobiles. Don't miss the preseason power sale happening now at Gold Boats and RV, providing family fun since 1941 in Missoula. Visit them today or shop online at goldboatsandrv.com. Get into Gold Boats and RV now and save big during the preseason power sale going on now. Monida Healthcare encourages you to take a break for your health with the Community Health Beat.
I know an obstetrician who thinks women are sadists because we tell each other stories about our pregnancy and birth experiences, the good, the bad, and the ugly. I explained to him that these are our war stories, and I, for one, find them fascinating. Starting from the first glimpse of that smudge on the ultrasound screen with a flicker of a heartbeat, through the morning sickness and heartburn, the clinic visits where we get to know each other so well, the gender reveal, the delight of watching a little hand or foot move across a pregnant abdomen, the impatience at the end when it feels like you're carrying around a bowling ball that you cannot put down, all the way to the thrilling conclusion when I meet you at Community Medical Center where your child's story begins. This is Dr. Beverly Brock, an obstetrician with Women's Choice of Missoula. Come in and share your story with us. Call 327-3875 for an appointment or visit us on the web at womenschoiceofmissoula.com.
A lot can happen in 6 seconds. A rodeo ride, a dramatic basketball win, and the world record holder can solve a Rubik's Cube. 6 seconds is how long it takes for an 18-wheeler traveling at a safe speed to come to a complete stop. And in those 6 seconds, that truck will travel the length of 2 football fields. So please, give them room. Never cut in front of a large truck for any reason. Our roads, our responsibility. Learn more at sharetheroadsafely.gov.
All right. Well, hey, thanks for boogieing with us on this Friday morning. It feels like the afternoon to me. We are going to get back to the last little back and forth we had on whether or not citizenship matters when interpreting the Constitution or looking at different schools of thought of interpretation with Soazig. But before that, I want to check in with Dave because Dave gets a big gold star for patience for being on the phone this long. Dave, thanks for calling in.
Yeah, good morning. There was a man named John Yo that was worked in the Bush administration who was a lawyer, and he believed that the President of the United States was not restricted by the laws of the land, that the President had the power to torture people if he wanted or have people killed, and the Constitution really, or the laws didn't apply to him.
Was Yo's real last name Machiavelli?
It could have been.
Sounds like the prince there.
But he was a prominent lawyer, and his words were used by the president to do what he wanted to do. And I'm just curious. He said basically that the only law that applied to the president was Congress impeaching him. Otherwise, he was free to do what he wanted to do.
So, I mean, not to cloud the issue too much, but I'm betting that Yo's argument was under the auspices of a time of war clause or the office of the president in his role as Supreme Commander of the military forces of the United States of America?
Well, from reading his articles, he didn't apply that. He didn't say it was just a one-time or a short-time event. But, we're at war forever now. We're at war against terrorism, and that'll go on forever.
All right. Well, hey, thanks for your call.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. Well, any response on Mr. Yo?
Yeah, John Yoo, who actually has come out recently expressing some skepticism of President Trump's exercise of executive power,
That's
does
John
take
Yoo, not
John,
me.
yeah,
Not
John,
me.
John Yoo, not John, comma,
And not John Yo.
Right.
But John Yoo.
Well, this all turns on the question. Article 2, which sets up the president's power, simply says the president has the executive power and shall take care that the laws be faithfully executed, and also is the commander-in-chief. A lot of our understanding of presidential power dates back to what George Washington did. WWGWD, I guess, would be.
Is that a bracelet somewhere?
if there was,
WWGWG.
If there was, John Yoo wears it. So that's one of those areas where it just says the executive power, it just says the commander-in-chief, but Congress has the power to declare war. Congress has only declared a handful of wars over our entire time. So how should courts and lawyers in the executive branch advising the president sort this out? That's going to be an area where the original meaning is going to run out relatively quickly and have to look at structure and practice.
Well, and I was going to say, when it comes to presidents, honestly, there's been some major points in history where the Supreme Court has failed to be a constraint on the executive branch, whether that's the incarceration of Japanese citizens in the United States or the ending of habeas corpus under Lincoln, or, I mean, there's a lot of episodes where the Supreme Court just said, well, we're not showing up for work today, and the president can have full throttle.
Yeah, that's one of the big challenges to the historical approach of original meaning, is that the president is far more powerful now than the framers could have considered. The framers were, guess what, not surprisingly worried about a king, a monarch, and took care to what they thought was limit the president's power. Hamilton actually argued that under the original Constitution, the president couldn't even fire one of his cabinet members without the consent of the Senate, because they required the consent of the Senate to be appointed. That got thrown out the window over time. But I think Dave raises an important question about these executive power issues really take us beyond what the original meaning can tell us.
Hey, real quick. So at the last end of the last hour, I should say, we had a little back and forth about whether or not you both were citizens of the United States. And sadly, frankly, Anthony shot himself in the foot by saying he wasn't a citizen of Montana, wasn't born here. I guess you can't run for federal office now.
I think I'm a naturalized citizen of Montana.
But Soazig, there was a back and forth consideration. Obviously, you have an accent, and people wonder. And when it comes to the law,
it's all made up.
It's important. It's important to
just
know.
Makes her sound smarter and more philosophical.
She is not a legal teacher at the University of Montana. She teaches philosophy and pre-law, which is, I don't know. What is pre-law?
Well, pre-law, I don't teach pre-law.
Oh, you don't?
I teach some classes in the philosophy of law, but pre-law is a program where I help students. So it's a lot of advising, in fact, and mentoring, and I help students get to law school.
Gotcha. So you're basically an advisor in that capacity.
Right.
You're not applying your insights into American constitutional
Absolutely
law to
not
American
for that,
jurisprudence or anything like that. Okay. So there you have it. But you followed up with a question. Why would it matter?
Yeah, I mean, it's a genuine question. I wonder why you would have to be a citizen in order to discuss matters about the Constitution. So I would, I could have a discussion with you on the Constitution of France, or the difference between common law and the different kinds of laws that exist in the world. And I don't see that just because you're not a citizen of a certain country, you would not be able to, sometimes not allowed to have those kinds of discussions. I'm not sure how it's relevant.
All right. Well, there you go. There's her response.
Yeah, in fact, the Constitution, whether justices are citizens, unlike we're worried about whether the president is a citizen, or they were, because of the possibility of a monarch coming over from overseas. The Constitution doesn't worry about that. In fact, the only people who actually take an oath to support the Constitution are lawyers, government officials, and naturalized citizens.
So there have been Supreme Court justices that never took an oath to uphold the Constitution?
Oh, all justices take an oath.
Oh, okay.
But they might not have been born here. They might have been naturalized citizens, such as Soazig is on the way to becoming Justice Frankfurter. Justice Sutherland, a great originalist in his own, he was born abroad. That's no barrier. Unlike the president, that's no barrier to becoming a Supreme Court justice.
And by the way, just go out there and find someone who's graduated from high school in America. The amount of intellectual involvement with the Constitution for someone that is not did not become a citizen in their lifetime is usually a little bit lower than someone who had to go through the process of becoming a naturalized citizen, right?
Yeah, I'll have to take an exam.
You got to go through school, basically. You got to take your tests. You got to take the exam, and it's not the easiest thing in the world, right?
Well, I don't know yet, but I'll study for it.
Well, if
there's no question, I'll study to become a citizen.
You call back and say, this was the easiest thing in the world.
I'll let you know.
Just tell me. All right?
I'll let you know.
All right, we got to go to a break soon, but when we get back, a really interesting discussion Anthony wanted to set up about whether or not Montana would even exist under an originalist interpretation of the U.S. Constitution. Are we legal? If you're an originalist, can we be here in Montana and calling ourselves United States citizens? Apparently, it's a legitimate question if you take an originalist point of view, or at least a particular stream of originalism. We'll be back after this quick break with those discussions. Now, you're talking about the question is whether or not the states can be forced to help the feds enforce immigration law. That's the main question, right?
Thank you, John.
Yeah, all right.
Yeah.
Cool. Thanks, Anthony.
Well, there are a couple things going on here. The background principle here is a real concern about standing armies present on American soil. That's one concern. Most of this is decided by statute, by Congress, and concerns. But standing armies on American soil, doing their work within the homeland, is a constitutional concern reflected in several areas, but particularly many provisions about the militia and the National Guard. It's one of the reasons they've left it to the states. In terms of whether state officials can be commandeered to enforce immigration law, National Guard officers under the state can be because of that historical relationship as a general matter. But police officers, sheriffs, for the same reason that the sheriff in Ravalli County didn't have to enforce the Brady Bill, they have a pretty good argument that they don't have to enforce federal immigration law either.
Yeah, it's an interesting, and the reason, of course, that law is there is so that, I mean, in the mind of the framers, I'm just pretending here, but I mean, there was a fear, and probably a legitimate one at the time, given the state of Europe, that a king could use or a ruler could use a strong military force to force his will on states that didn't go along with the program, right? And so the idea was to divide up the military power, give the states a separate type of power, so that they wouldn't have to face the barrel of a gun the next time they made a decision that was different from what Washington, D.C. made. So anyway, speaking of Washington, D.C., and whether or not it's a state, that's for another day. But whether or not Montana is actually, under an originalist interpretation of state, is a real question, apparently. Now, I haven't heard this before, so Anthony, introduce us to the debate here.
Well, Montana is clearly a state because Congress created it in 1889 under the Enabling Act. But where Montana is mostly within the Louisiana Purchase, which might have been the most important non-constitutional and maybe unconstitutional act that any president took place.
Difference, real quick, on non-constitutional and unconstitutional.
Well, President Jefferson, when he had the chance to make this deal with France to buy Louisiana,
right,
himself thought that the Constitution didn't provide him the power to acquire territory. He was what we might call today a strict constructionist. And he expressed in various writings at the time that essentially he was going to go forward and cut the check and take Louisiana and expand the nation by an extraordinary amount and ask for forgiveness rather than permission, because the Constitution does not clearly authorize the acquisition of territory, including the territory right over the Continental Divide from us.
Now, he didn't go through Congress for this.
He had to go to Congress afterwards.
Afterwards, though.
Yeah.
That's the big difference,
yeah.
right? Like, hey, Mom, I bought a new car. it's a little bit of a little too late, right, for mercy.
There are a lot of these. Oftentimes, we see presidents asking for forgiveness rather than permission. Around the Civil War, the most famous example was Lincoln starting to, suspending habeas corpus, getting out there, starting to take on a war footing before a declaration of war, and then bringing to Congress at around July 4th of this year, bringing to Congress and saying, "Look, I think we're in a war. I've gone and done warlike things. I know I don't have the power to do it. If you guys think we're in a war, help me raise some troops and let's go to war. If not, sorry."
So when we talk about the Constitution and originalism, I think that where it really looks bad is if you look at originalism through the intent school of interpretation. When you look at the intent of the passage or the purchase of the Louisiana Purchase, obviously the person doing it, the president at the time, knew that it was not constitutional, that it went against the rules of the Constitution, and did it anyway, and was never really held accountable for that. Right?
Well, he was reelected.
His intent was to break the Constitution, or to go against it at least.
Well, and Jefferson himself had experience with this in his election in 1800. John Adams, the president, passed this horrible, ugly Alien and Sedition Act that punished anyone who criticized anyone at the top of the federal government except for the vice president. Why? Because that was one Thomas Jefferson, so it was okay to criticize him. And that law that criminalized criticism of government sunset as soon as Adams was out of office.
Genius.
Now, the judges didn't do much about it. The great Chief Justice John Marshall didn't have great concerns over this. A clear violation in our lights of the First Amendment rights to free speech and criticize the government. But it wasn't the courts that decided that constitutional case. It was the people who voted Adams out in 1800, brought in Jefferson, and Jefferson pardoned everyone. It was Jefferson and the people of the United States who resolved that case. Whether or not it was original meaning, we decided you have a right to criticize your government.
So, I mean, there's another process, and actually this comes up in civic government a lot, right? With, for example, the mayor. When one of his arguments for using or getting the water system was, hey, if you don't like the way things are run, you don't need to go to a public service commissioner or another civic engagement sort of facility. You can just fire me or whoever your city councilor is every 4 years, and that's how you'll hold us accountable.
The most important part of the U.S. and state constitution is the fact that it provides for regular elections of our officials, and in Montana, regular election of our judges and justices.
All right. Well, hey, we got to go to a break. When we get back, I've got the Attorney General of the state of Montana on the phone, Tim Fox. We'll get you an update on what's going on in the legislature and the Attorney General's office's involvement in some of those bills and items, as well as a case involving Washington State and the state of Montana when it comes to utility regulation. We'll be back after a quick break. All right, we're back on the Talkback Show playing some funky music, and these legal beagles are chatting behind the scenes here. We've got push Anthony away for a second and chat with Tim Fox, the Attorney General for the state of Montana. Tim, thanks so much for giving us some time and calling in today.
Yeah, thank you. I wish I'd have known Anthony was going to be on. I would have got on the internet and listened to him talk.
Well, you know what? We'll throw this show up on YouTube. You can listen afterwards. We
Great,
had
great.
fun discussions on whether Montana should actually exist if you're an originalist. I guess we'll probably get back into that after the break. But hey, speaking of what's going on in Montana, I know that your office has been involved in some of the legislature activities recently. Tell us what's going on.
Well, you know, the big issue over here this session is the budget. Unfortunately, the revenues haven't been coming in as they had been predicted, and so everybody's having their belts, and unfortunately, there'll probably be a few things that can't get funded this go-round, but the good news is that we're not broke because we have a constitutional provision that requires that we have a balanced budget, and Anthony Johnstone would know all about that.
Yeah, well, and even though we do have the constitutional provision that we have a balanced budget, there are certain types of spending that are kind of excluded from that provision, right?
Well, you're probably right. I'm not aware of what those would be specifically, but There are certain things, obviously, that in terms of public safety and what have you, that the government just has to spend money on.
And, this morning, today, actually, we were talking with our county attorney about strangulation. We had 2 cases locally just this week, 4 cases totally of assault on a family member, but 2 of those cases involved strangulation. I understand that's been a concern with your office as well.
That's right. What we've learned through the years through court cases is that someone can strangle a partner or family member, and the courts have said that that does not qualify as an assault because there isn't any serious bodily injury there. And, of course, it's a very traumatic thing to be strangled, and certainly if you were strangled long enough, it could make you pass out or even kill you. So we're one of the few states across the nation that doesn't have a provision for prosecuting strangulation. And so my office worked with the Yellowstone County Attorney's Office and drafted a bill, and we asked Senator Margie McDonald from Billings to carry that bill. It's Senate Bill 153. And so if it passes, and it got through the Senate and with flying colors, huge margins, if it passes, it'll create a new offense of strangulation of a partner or family member, which essentially means if you purposely or knowingly impede the normal breathing or circulation of blood of a partner or family member by applying pressure on the throat or neck or by blocking airflow to the nose and mouth, that will be a prosecutable offense.
Wow. Yeah, it's one of those things that just seems to be happening more and more. And it's why I don't know as a reporter if we're just seeing more incidents of it in the news because we're prosecuting it more severely, or whether or not it's occurring more frequently.
Well, it could be a combination of things. It may be occurring more frequently, but I think, my offices work very hard in trying to raise the level of services to victims of crime, in particular sexual crimes, and make sure that prosecutors have all the tools they need. I'm hopeful that a lot of the work that we've been doing in making sure our justice system is more fair is causing people to self-report more often.
Well, hey, there's another topic before we run out of time with you that I wanted to chat with you about. I understand the state of Montana wants to get involved in a Washington state rate case. A lot of us are wondering, don't you have enough papers to read? What's going on?
Well, interestingly enough, Colstrip Units 1 and 2, the 2 coal-fired generation plants in Colstrip, Montana, they're owned 50% by Puget Sound Energy, which is a Washington-based utility company, and they've been buying electricity from Colstrip for years because it's so cheap and plentiful. And interestingly, Montana exports about 50% of the electricity that's generated in this state, and that's primarily because coal is so cheap and efficient in producing electricity. But at any rate, the Puget Sound Energy went to the legislature last year as a part of the federal government's war on coal, I think, and talked the legislature into allowing them to recoup the costs of decommissioning and cleaning up Colstrip Units 1 and 2 on the backs of their ratepayers. So the legislature required that they file their rate case by January of 2017, which they've done. We think that they've grossly underestimated the cost of decommissioning those 2 plants. And, of course, they have not taken into account at all the associated cost to the state of Montana and its residents in prematurely closing those plants. So we've intervened on behalf of the state of Montana. We're working with our state departments here under the governor's administration, and we'll be providing expert information on decommissioning and cleanup and the impacts of decommissioning those 2 plants.
Well, one more topic in the short topic extravaganza portion of the show. The last weekend, I think it was Saturday, there was this drug summit.
Right.
That Diane Sands, your local representative, was a part of. Did you participate in that at all?
We did. We helped set that up. It's a part of a larger program that we've taken leadership on to address primarily the methamphetamine problem here in Montana. It's become of epidemic proportions, And, of course, it not only affects the lives of our citizens and it affects our communities, but it has a huge social cost. So we brought all the stakeholders we could think of together and had about a 5-hour session where we had numerous panels talking about the scope of the problem. We're working with a consultant to bring together stakeholders and gather information that can be useful to the legislature and policymakers. And we'll be conducting town halls this year in conjunction with the Montana Healthcare Foundation, which we've engaged to help out on this. And our goal is to get the information we need to make some changes in how we address this issue. It's become a real problem. We're losing lives. And, I think what we'll learn is that prevention and education are important, and treatment and counseling and early intervention in the lives of some of these individuals will be important as well. So stay tuned.
Oh, okay, this is a question way out of left field. But, we're talking about originalism today, and since you're a lawyer and the Attorney General of the state of Montana, you got any thoughts on the concept?
Well, certainly, probably the most noted originalist is Justice Antonin Scalia, and I was honored to have been invited by his family to go to his funeral mass in Washington, D.C. last year, and then to attend the family's memorial service. He was an incredible jurist, and we really are sorry that he's gone. But Judge Gorsuch, the individual that President Trump has nominated to fill that spot on the U.S. Supreme Court, is an originalist, as I think apparently you and Anthony Johnstone had visited about. He's also a textualist, and those are terms maybe not a lot of people know, but
well, they might by this point in the program. So
yeah, well, good. But as I mentioned to Anthony and you when we were off the air, Judge Gorsuch is a Westerner. He's from Colorado, and he really understands Indian law. And it was interesting to see that the Confederated Salish and Kootenai tribe, I think today or yesterday, endorsed his nomination and have encouraged Senator Daines and Senator Tester to confirm Judge Gorsuch. And I think he'll be good for our country, and he should be confirmed.
All right. Well, hey, Tim, thanks so much for joining us today.
Well, thank you, John, and appreciate you letting me be on the air, and thanks to your listeners.
Yeah, we'll have you on every day if you want. The phones are open. You can call in whenever you want.
You'll get tired of me.
By the way, that goes for you too, listeners. 721-1290 is the number to call in. We're going to go to a quick break, and we'll be right back.
Bob Ward's Winter Clearance Progressive Sale is now at final markdowns. Take an extra 40% off the lowest mark price on select merchandise.
That's right. Bob Ward's Progressive Winter Clearance Sale is now at final markdowns of 40% off. You won't find better deals on select current season gear.
Save an extra 40% off the lowest mark price now during the Progressive Sale at Bob Ward's.
Limited to stock on hand.
Hi, I'm Cody Gleason, one of the directors at Life Credit Company. When I worked in the life insurance industry, I saw so many people who were diagnosed with cancer and needed money desperately to pay for their mounting expenses. In fact, a recent study found that more than 50% of Americans go bankrupt due to serious illnesses like cancer. That's why we created the Living Benefit Loan Program. It lets you cash out up to 50% of your life insurance benefit immediately, tax-free, while still preserving coverage for your family. There's no premium payments, credit checks, or money out of pocket required. Life Credit Company counselors will help you one-on-one throughout the entire process, and your money comes in as little as 30 days. It only takes 2 minutes to see if you qualify for this program that has brought thousands of people unbelievable relief.
Call Life Credit Company at 800-978-2500. That's 800-978-2500. 800-978-2500. Or learn more online at lifecreditcompany.com. That's lifecreditcompany.com. Not available in all states.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1. It's the final 5 hours of extended President's Day savings at the Living Room Furniture. It's happening tomorrow, 10 to 3. 5 final hours of incredible savings in all departments, with fresh markdowns on sofas, sectionals, recliners, and mattresses too. And you can still take up to 4 years to pay interest-free on approved credit. It's all happening tomorrow for 5 hours only. Doors open at 10. Just look for that big purple pillow in South Reserve. Shop at the Living Room tomorrow and save big.
All right. we're back on the Talkback Show, and we're back speaking with Anthony Johnstone from the University of Montana and Soazig Bihan, also from the University of Montana. And they're both professors, but Anthony's in the law school and Soazig is in the philosophy department. So anyway, we're talking a little bit during the last segment about textualism and originalism and Mr. Gorsuch. And I was hoping you might be able to comment yourself a little bit, Anthony, as Mr. Fox did, on Gorsuch and his approach to the law, because that's one of those current events that's, you know, on everyone's minds right now as the Supreme Court nominee gets ready for confirmation hearings.
Yeah, confirmation hearings are a good reminder that the justices we have, the judges we have, and the views they bring to the bench are really a function of the democratic process. President Obama did not get a nominee confirmed by the Senate. We had an election. President Trump gets a nominee, and of course, the Senate will decide whether he's seated. So together, we're about to begin one of those rare conversations, on average, every few years, where we get to hear from our elected representatives how they think the Constitution should be interpreted.
Now, let me ask you this: as an attorney or someone that's worked in law, would you view that process differently than the politicians do? I mean, everybody comes in with a different standard of what they think that the judge should bring to the table, right? And I'm sure there's all kinds of crazy things that people might put on their list. But what do you, as a lawyer, think should definitely be there? And what do you think that a judge should be able to do in order to be on the Supreme Court?
Well, as a law professor, I'd love for them to mix it up some more and get more deeply into certain commitments. But as a practical matter, the politics of it is that the nominee is, assuming they're likely to have the votes, is going to play it safe and not provide beyond general expressions of commitment and fidelity to the Constitution and the rule of law real details, certainly not details on what, from the senator's side, most want to know.
This is my problem, too. In Montana, we elect our judges by popular vote, or at least many of them. And as a guy that interviews people regularly, first off, the people that are running for these positions are usually lawyers, which means that they're somewhat adept at wiggle words, right, at getting away and around the concepts that you might be trying to bring to the table. And I find it notoriously difficult to get any pins into their positions and find out what they really mean. Everyone says basically, yeah, of course I support the Constitution. Yeah, of course we want that. And you really don't have it's really hard to squish the Jell-O into a mold that is understandable. And I really think that the public is kind of hard-pressed to find answers from candidates.
I think that's right, and so both at the federal and the state level, we end up relying on other groups who look at the candidate's record, look at the nominee's record, and based on that record, try to figure out where they're going to go once they're on the bench.
And I don't know, it's kind of like running your political process through political action committees instead of through the people that are actually involved. And that seems like a scary situation, especially when you're talking about something as important and as powerful as the judiciary.
Well, we have to think that usually with presidential nominations, and particularly with presidential nominations of Supreme Court justices, there is a lot of vetting and deliberation that goes in before the nomination. Now, that's out of the public eye, but it's conducted by the president and his counsel's office. And there is thought going into what they want from a justice, and you'll see inklings of that in the process.
Is there extreme vetting or just regular vetting?
I'd have to. That I think one of the ironies of extreme vetting is that there hasn't been maybe enough of that going on with respect to certain people hired by the administration, but. On the Supreme Court justice, a lot of the work goes on in the front end to identify the person, to have a list, to identify their commitments. It really is the Senate confirmation process then that becomes kind of a kabuki dance that's somewhat meaningless because the senators want commitments on particular issues, and the judge, if they're doing their job, can't commit on future issues, although they could certainly say more about past issues. which cases they think were wrongly decided in the past, what their favorite cases are, what their justice. It ends up being a little bit like show and tell. Who's your favorite justice?
And honestly, watching the Senate and the House on almost all these issues that come to the federal level, like when they know they're on TV, right? They're on point, and they're not necessarily asking the question to get a response. It's not like a conversation. They're asking the question to get across to whatever their political majority back home might be that they're fighting for them. Right. And so it's not really the kind of important question and answer that you might have, for example, if it was a closed room legal scholar to another legal scholar or a concerned citizen to a legal scholar sort of situation.
Well, as I quoted Justice Elena Kagan's confirmation hearings earlier, they're a little more substantive than that, but they're not particularly detailed. And Originalism presents a great example. Judge Bork, who is nominated for the Supreme Court by President Reagan, was not confirmed, and he might have been the most candid judicial nominee to appear before the Senate. His problem is that he told the truth about his views on originalism.
Well, and there were a lot of Democrats in power at the time.
Right. Well, and that goes to show that the court we have is a function of the political process, even if the justices are acting according to principle.
But now we have a great new word, which is called borking. We're getting borked, which is what happened to Mr. Bork.
We also have garlanding now, so that's a whole new thing.
Oh, yes. That's just delaying it, right?
It's well, delaying it to death.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah, you had something real quick, Soazig.
In that conversation to me is that we can bring that back to the originalist claim, which is that we're just going to interpret the Constitution with what it says. If the Constitution is actually the result of a political process, which happens the way you've been describing, where people don't state their real intention, when people are very careful, where people are always on the spot, then there is a real problem about thinking that looking at their intent or what they said or what was said during those hearings is going to tell you about the true meaning of the Constitution, whether that's the authority of the Constitution or not.
Which is, I think, a really important point. When we're talking about originalism, you need to look at original meaning and the way it was understood by the public, not necessarily original intent, which is where you get into a lot of trouble with originalist schools. Hey, we got to go to a break. When we get back, we'll have a question from Mike, and yours as well. 721-1290 is the number to call in.
Timbers is the all-new restaurant inside the exciting new Grey Wolf Peak Casino on top of Evero Hill. And we are giving away a $50 gift certificate every Thursday. So make sure to tune in every Thursday for your chance to win a $50 gift certificate to Timbers.
Is it a winter cold or is it the flu? Call the Community Medical Center free nurse on call line. It's always open. Call 327-4770. From fevers and chills to aches and pains, you can call anytime. The Community Medical Center free nurse on call line, 327-4770.
Most party fouls? Not a big deal.
We're leaving.
But if you decide to drink and drive underage, you could lose your license and your freedom. Underage drinking and driving. The ultimate party foul.
Major key alert. Don't ever play yourself. The key is to make it, so make it.
Learn the real major keys to getting to college at GetSchooled.com. Brought to you by Get Schooled and the Ad Council.
All right, we're almost out of time on the Talk Back show, but we have time for a few more calls. Let's go ahead and chat with Mike. Mike, you're on the air.
Hi, thanks for taking my call. Hey, I just had a quick question about changing the Constitution with constitutional amendments. I know the Equal Rights Amendment has it come and gone, or is it still kind of in limbo, or is there a time frame for states to make up their minds on certain issues and have the amendments go through, or can just 2 or 3 more states pass their own version of the Equal Rights Amendments and then it just goes to the country?
Are you talking about the process of the states doing it instead of going through the legislature?
Well, I think to add an amendment to the Constitution, I think, wasn't it? Oh boy, I'm brushing off the dust of my history.
3/5, I believe, of the states.
Is it 3/5 of the states? 3/4 of the states have to
3/4,
right?
Have to vote for it.
2/3 of Congress and 3/4 of the states.
Okay, gotcha. Okay.
And I think the Equal Rights Amendment is still kind of out there in limbo, isn't it? Or is it done and gone? the ERA?
Oh, this is a...
Thanks for your call, Mike.
Thank you.
Mike, this is a great question in terms of the time. Nowadays, most constitutional amendments have their own fuse. So if it's not ratified in a certain amount of time, the amendment then goes out of the... is no longer eligible to be ratified. I think that's the case with the ERA. There are a couple... The 27th Amendment is the most interesting on this count. The 27th Amendment, which says that members of Congress can't raise their pay while they're in their own term, was part of the original Bill of Rights. It was originally proposed in 1789. It was ratified in 1992. So just over 2 centuries, it crept along and then was ratified in 1992 when it was proposed in 1789.
Now, is this something, though, that they brought it back up? Did they have, like, lightning rods? They resurrect Frankenstein and he gets to move and amble into the courthouse again?
No, the count of the states that made up the majority, or that made up the enough states to ratify, is counted beginning in 1789. Now, the ERA is a great example of a non-originalist kind of originalist movement. In the 70s, the court was hearing cases about whether the 14th Amendment's equality provision protected women's equal rights as well as equal rights based on race. And the court was cautious and said, it might, but we're not sure. Let's wait to see what happens with the ERA thing. Well, the ERA failed. And next time the case came up, the court said, well, actually, the 14th Amendment did it all along. It protects people based on
gender,
based on sex or gender discrimination.
Gotcha. So, as to the other case that he was talking about, is that something that might come? I mean, do we have these kind of latent laws that might just pop up and become part of the Constitution tomorrow if the states ratify them?
We see this a lot on the side of calls for constitutional conventions. So, every amendment that's made into the Constitution has been proposed by 2/3 of Congress. States can call a constitutional convention, although we've never had one. Even the Philadelphia one wasn't a regular constitutional convention. And there are a lot of convention calls that have been piling up over time on different subjects, and we have no idea what will happen to them.
Well, we've never had a Article 5 constitutional convention, although we did have, before we had our Constitution that we have now, constitutional sessions that were similar to what you might expect with an Article 5 convention.
Well, Article 5 conventions, generally, there's some debate over this, but generally everything's on the table, and we've usually avoided that. For example, with the 17th Amendment, the states came close to calling a convention to provide for the direct election of senators, and they pushed Congress to propose the 17th Amendment.
There is a lot of recent scholarship that would debate you on the idea that everything's on the table, and that it was usually done under the idea of a certain theme or a couple of different legislation. I don't know this because of my own background, but Rob Natelson, who's a specialist in this field, talks about it pretty regularly on Talkback, as he's been one of the heads of the Article 5 movement.
Yeah, I think as a matter of the history, Rob Natelson, who is my predecessor, has done some exhaustive analysis of it. As a matter of the politics, we need to remember that where we got our own Constitution wasn't a constitutional convention. They were trying to go in to talk about the Articles of Confederation, and it became a runaway convention that gave us our own Constitution.
All right. Let's, or do we have a caller there or not? I'm not sure what's going to happen over there. Well, hey, to wrap up, Soazig, as the devil's advocate here, you started off the show by saying you were ready to get into a little bit of trouble. What is your thought on originalism? I mean, do you think that it's overstated, that we use it too heavily?
I do. Yeah.
What do you think we should lean on?
Well, so as I said, I think it's overstated in the sense that the weak thesis of originalism, which is words of the Constitution matter, is trivial. And if we look into whether the strong thesis, which is the authority of the Constitution, comes from the particular meaning or the particular intent, original intent of original meaning, then I think that's highly debatable.
So why is it debatable? I don't understand. By the way, it seems to me jurisprudence is trending away from that position.
Good.
That they're trending towards. They're trending towards meaning. As being as original meaning being super important.
As you mentioned, and we said that several times. Intent, the intent school is really not going to work at all. That we know.
Okay. Hey, we're almost out of time. Thanks so much for joining us on Talk Back today. We'll see you next Monday.
Or more, protect your vehicle and save tons of money at Vigilante Parking on the Fly. We don't do shuttles because we don't like them, and we think you don't like them either. Anytime, day or night, you park at the airport and we pick up your car. When your flight arrives home, we have your car cleaned up and waiting for you at the airport. No shuttle, no waiting, just ready. If you're flying out of town for 5 days or more, save money and stay safe at Vigilante Parking on the Fly. Make your reservations Monday through Friday at 549-4111.
I adopted Bento in 2010 from a shelter. A lot of people know him as Keyboard Cat.
That's just one adoption story that started at a shelter. Visit theshelterpetproject.org to find a pet near you. Brought to you by Maddie's Fund, the Humane Society of the United States, and the Ad Council.
Habitat for Humanity of Ravalli County is looking for their next partner family for a home to be built in Darby in the fall of 2017. Visit RavalliHabitat.org or call 375-1926. Act now. Deadline is March 31st.
KGVO Missoula. KGVO Frenchtown.
AM 1290 and 98.3 FM.
On translator K250 2FP.
Newstalk KGVO.